Hey everybody, and welcome to my UDK tutorial series, part 9. I would have kind of gone through the simple steps of setting this up. This is going to be about terrain, and okay, never mind. Apparently, oh yeah, because I didn't actually save it. This wasn't the autosave version. So I'll just quickly delete this and do it again. And I'm going to go ahead and say this. When working with terrain, you want to be very cautious because sometimes if your computer can't really handle it, whenever it's loading the terrain and you're working with it and doing the lighting and stuff, it will sometimes crash. So make sure that you do have autosave set and save regularly when working with terrain, because I was doing this tutorial earlier and it crashed. So I'll just kind of restart this here and be a little bit more careful. So, to actually create a new terrain, you want to go up to Tools and click New Terrain. There is no other way to do this besides doing it that way. So remember, Tools, New Terrain. Very simple. Now the location is where the, let's see, I think it's lower left corner will spawn. So you could set this to whatever you wanted it to be, and you can manually move it later, but this is just providing precision. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of this tutorial, and typically it won't matter because you can just manually move the terrain around later anyway. And then the patches is the actual size. So we're just going to set this to 100 by 100. That's a pretty good size. If you do it too big, it will go outside the zone of the designated UDK area. And what I mean by that is if I just go outside the sky zone here, if I go up, if you notice there's lines up there in the far corner. Basically the map is not infinite. If you notice the lines stop. Now this does not mean that if you're creating games you can only make a game within this area. You can always make levels and stuff that can link whole new sections of the map together. But for like one specific segment at a time, you can only have so much loaded. Otherwise it just won't work correctly. Because even in games that you see that have like terrain spawning and stuff like that, for instance, maybe like a Minecraft or something as a good example of terrain generation at one time. So this is kind of an example of a section that would be loaded at one time. So if your terrain is so big that it goes outside of that, you're going to have some issues, like the terrain flashing and glitching out, and then your game lagging a whole lot and eventually crashing. Now, if you click on this, you'll get your little cursor movement, and you can move it up and down and all that kind of crazy stuff. So I'm just going to kind of position this right over here in front of our little building thing that we made. And over here. And I'm hoping it's not going to crash, because sometimes it just does that randomly. Especially if you don't doing other things and your computer can't really handle it very well. And so it's very important to have a good computer working with this. And sometimes it doesn't. And, it's just kind of weird. It crashes randomly. I don't understand it entirely. That may not be perfect. I don't want to worry so much about it getting it just exact. I don't want it to be too huge of a gap, but I think that's going to be just fine. Okay, so also you're going to want to make sure you have a good light, like a sun or something, so that not a spotlight. That way people, when they're outside, they can associate a light coming from a certain direction. That's typically a good idea, unless you're making some kind of like biodome thing that's like inside that, which would be crazy and cool and awesome. But typically, I mean, I'm just giving some basic things that you would kind of already know. But also, Sky Dome is also very good, because otherwise, and I went into game mode right now, that's why the cursor disappeared. To do that, you can just click this little button up here, or you can press G. Now if I go out here, all the lines are going to be disappeared, and you'll just see darkness. Just darkness. So you typically want to make sure that you do have a sky dome, otherwise it's just going to be completely black. Unless you have a night sky dome, which would then have stars, so it would still be outside. Otherwise it's just like kind of creepy. A lot. And even if you had a night sky dome, you would still have a moon as well, which would be casting some sort of light. So, okay, now that we have this, one thing to note is that this is infinitesimally infinitely small. I'm not gonna get too technical, just infinitely small. So this has literally no height at all. So that's why we have to edit it and get a height map. So that's what we're going to do now, and then I'll show you how to add actual textures, because it's just this default texture until you actually add stuff to it, which is not difficult. But to start editing this, we need to go into terrain mode, terrain editing mode. So you just kind of drag this over here and just go over here, and you're not going to be able to edit anything but terrain in this. And if I were to click on something else, it would, I could edit things like this, but sometimes sometimes if you're not in the right mode, I could actually do stuff, but then it'll say you cannot complete this because you're not in the right camera mode. So even though you can click on stuff and do some basic stuff, you're not going to be able to, in these windows, edit stuff. So sometimes if you encounter an error that says you're not in the right mode, make sure, because you can actually switch camera mode off sometimes. It just gets switched off, so you're not in any mode. And I don't know exactly how that happens, but I've had it happen occasionally to me. This is just a little side note thing. If you encounter this glitch, that you don't assigned any kind of camera mode, and sometimes you can be in selection mode or something, so you're not allowed to do anything or edit really anything. So just know that. Alright, now back to the terrain. Now it will show what terrain you're editing. So if you actually were to have like multiple layers of a terrain, if you were making some really complicated map, or you didn't have just one big terrain but actually separate terrain things, because you can do that. I could import a whole new terrain in here through tools. Now if you had that, this would scroll down, or even if you had multiple levels with different terrains, this would scroll down and you could select which one you wanted to use. Now basically this is just all your terrain editing stuff right here and right here, and then your brush sizes. So here's your brush, and it's not really very big right now, so I could increase the brush size, and actually I would have to increase the radius a little bit so you can see. And brush size, this actually does edit the brush size, but if it's really better just to use this as opposed to this. It's just a little bit easier in my opinion, because if you use something like this, it's still really small, because the big circle is, if you look kind of closely, you can see the ring. And small is good for getting very finite touches, because it takes a while to get the terrain down, but typically you're going to want to use this. And the fall off, basically what that does is, I'll do this. That way you can see. There's an inner ring and an outer ring. The inner ring is where most of your stuff is going to happen. The outer ring just kind of like fades it. So if you were to make, let me just do this right here. If you notice, the inner part went up directly and the rest of it sloped around it. So that's kind of what fall off does. It just kind of tells the range of how much, basically kind of like fading in a video. If you fade something, this is kind of like what fall off does. It just gives the amount that is to be increased at a lesser degree, so as to slope it and make it kind of natural. So in a way, we kind of made this like flat little plateau mountain thing. If I increase it more and then more and then more, this is all increasing relative to this. And if I were to put the cursor right here, it would start increasing. Now what has happened here is I've started increasing this, but this also increased along with it, because this was inside the circle, and the fall off is affecting everything, so you can get these weird looking shapes of mountains if you just kind of go along here. So now we've got this real straight up thing. And I'll just lower this down, and how I'm doing this is I'm left clicking, but it's very important because you can left click and right click, and because left click is to go up, and that's my backup. Left click is to go up, right click to go down, and doing that just normally will make the camera move. So what they did is, because they wanted you to be able to move the camera without having to edit out of the close this down, go into camera move, move it around, and then open this back up again, because that's really a hassle. So to be able to edit terrain, you hold control and then left click and right click. So if it's not, like, the terrain isn't working for you, you have to make sure you hold control. So, and hold it down the whole time you're doing stuff, because if I were to do this and then let off control, it will actually continue going until you let off the mouse, which I did not know that. So that's actually handy to know. So you don't actually have to hold control down the whole time as long as you don't let off the mouse. So I'm not even holding control right now, but I let go of the mouse and then the camera moves. So okay, so that's that, and you've seen just the regular paint mode, just up and down, pretty simple. Now there's also smooth, which is pretty useful. Real quick though, I will go over the strength before I continue on. What this does is I'll lower this down, and you saw, let me just do this. So 1, 2, 3. 3 seconds, you've got something like that. Now if I were to lower this to, like, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So basically, the strength is just how quickly it makes everything rise up. So you can get more finite movements if you set the strength lower to be able to get it at just the right height to make things work. Because sometimes it's just, oh wait, no, that's, because okay, that's a little bit too high. Go down, wait, no, let me do it over here. It's like, oh, that's why. It's like, oh wait, that's too high. Let me go down, up, that's too much. Let me go up, down, wait, I got to get it just right. You can put the strength down and you can just get it just right, and there we go. You've got it at the right level that you wanted. Now one thing to note, adding more under it, and this saves memory for it to have absolutely no height. So this is actually just raising and curving the terrain itself. It's not actually adding anything under it. So that's kind of important for a thing that we're going to discuss in a minute, which is sectors and stuff. Real quick, I'm going to go ahead and do smooth, and then I'll get into the sectors. Okay, so smooth, basically it does exactly what you expect. Let's go over here to these really high mountains and increase our strength. Whoops, dang it. Doesn't really like it whenever I hold the mouse button and click on other things at the same time, does it? Or hold the WASD keys. Okay. Smooths out the terrain, nice. And this is good for getting, like, kind of smoothing the mountains so you don't have these jutting points. Because, not all mountains that you see are just these huge points. And, you can get nice sloping hills, and it's a very useful tool. Very useful tool. And again, you have fall off. So the middle section is going to be sloped more than the rest of it. So do keep that in mind whenever you're editing things, because sometimes you may not want fall off, or even the radius to be so big. So you can have a really large fall off in a small radius. So you mess around with this, you get the terrain that you want. So I'm just keeping it at the biggest section so you can kind of see the effects better. So let's see. Average takes, this is useful too. All of these are actually very useful, but just some of them you'd only use in certain circumstances depending on what you want to do. But this will take the average of the area, and see what happened. It flattened it out, but it didn't go all the way up to this highest point, and it didn't go all the way to this lowest point. So it took the average of all of the terrains in the area. Okay, and so here's, if I'll do it again over here. Here's a really low point and a really high point. So bam, there's the average of all the terrain in that area. It averaged it up, did a quick mathematical calculation, and put it on the appropriate height. And then it just will get the average of all the things that you go over and just kind of smooth it out so you can get these kind of cool looking ridges. So there we go. We've got these cool, well, there. Now we've got these like cool looking like ridges, and this is kind of, you know, realistic in the fact that there's, you know, geological formations like this. They do geologically form like this, and if you do it in much smaller sections, not these. Okay, sorry about that. Had a bit of an issue with some children. I had to go see what was up. So that's one reason why I can't upload these so often, because my life is so hectic. But I tried to avoid things like that. Anyway, back to what I was saying about the average. I can't quite remember what I was saying, but pretty much that's it with the average. You know, if you were to tone this down, you can kind of get some really cool effects. If you can kind of use your imagination a little bit and kind of imagine what you can do with this, add some shrubbery, some vines, some waterfalls, and you can get something really cool. Waterfalls flowing down off a neat little pancake type pattern like this. And again, this is a legitimate geographical feature. I forget what they call them, like things like this, but this, you know, this isn't just some video game thing. It's a legitimate geographical feature. So anyway, you've also got noise. This is good if you want some like really scraggly mountains or pits or something. You can just hold this down and you can get like these really sharp points. You know, if you wanted like a thing of jagged rocks or something. So that's and the noise is kind of bad right now. But if you were to, you know, tone the strength down and then go over like here, you know, you kind of just, it's not as really as potent. Let's see. I think there's a button on adjusting the noise. I forget what it is. Let's see. Tone this down a little bit more. Maybe it's this. Yeah. The strength adjusts the noise. So you can get like some little bumps or something if you wanted that. So that's kind of useful. Now that's 100%. That's like 14, and then that's like 4. So, you know, you hold it, and if you can notice, it's just like bumping it up and down. So it's using like a noise file format to be able to adjust this, and it's just kind of, you know, randomly going, because this is a height map. So it's technically this isn't saved in 3D. It's just using darker and white and dark things on like a 2D platform to be able to adjust the like the settings of the map. The, you know, black and white being the difference between dark for the between low and high. So, and please ignore those beepings. Stop beeping. Okay, now you've also got what is this? Obviously, you cannot click on that. You've got various things having to do with sectors, which I'll get into in just a minute. And then mirror. This is really cool if you're wanting to do like a ridge type thing. So let me just go to paint real quick and let me show you this. Now you can see it's got an extra brush over there, and this has the exact same settings that you're currently using. So if I do this and go up, please. This is not wanting to work. Oh, because I have, what in the world? Oh, that's smooth. That's why. My bad. Oh, yes, I forgot to mention. On most of these, you can right-click and it'll do like the opposite. So if, except for maybe the noise, right-click and left-click kind of do the same thing. But smooth, if you right-click, it just makes it rougher, and then, you know, left-clicking smooths it all. So I forgot to mention that. And then the average, I don't know. I guess left-click and right-click do the same thing there. So I forgot to mention that. So sorry about that. But now I've got the same thing, you can make like these ridges really easily. So now I've got like this nice, circular area in the middle, and I didn't have to do the whole thing, and so it's really good looking. So you can make cool looking ridges and stuff, and you can tell it either to not mirror only on the x-axis. So that would mean it would be only this axis, and I could move like this, and it would like switch along there, but it wouldn't switch to the other side over there, or just the y-axis. So it would be like that, and I could come over this way, and it would only switch like that way. Or you can do both, so it would just be exactly opposite of your cursor the entire time. And there's uses for all of those. For instance, with the X, you can get like really close, things like that, and you can kind of come up and then merge, like you come out and then come around. But if you're doing X and Y, that wouldn't work because it just goes exactly opposite wherever you are. And then, same thing with the Y. So I'm going to set that to none so I don't have double. Now, the only other thing to mention here about the terrain making is the, what's it called? Sectors. So what this does is allows you, because this entire thing is split up into various components. So if I left click here, or right click, is it? Oh, there we go. You have to kind of drag it a little bit to get it to, wait, there we go. Dang it, work. Stupid, there we, whoa, what did I just do? Okay, yeah. So there, I was just like deleting whole sections of this map that I can then bring back, and I can like left click and then drag and add more of it, I think. This isn't wanting to work correctly. Yeah, it's kind of tricky, but as you can see, I'm just kind of adding back, and it saves the entire height map, but you can add and delete sections of it to be able to, I think you have to get at the edge, that's the problem. So, and it's saved the height map in its data, and I don't understand that entirely, so I'm sorry. It was working for me earlier, and now it's not, like most things. So I don't understand why it's not working. So right click is delete, left click is add. Oh, that's it. You don't hold control. There we go. So I added two sections there. Well, you hold control and then you can click, and it's very peculiar. So you hold control and then you can click, and then there you go. So you kind of have to like go down and then like over, up, or I'm not really sure exactly how this works, unfortunately. But you can see I'm just like adding and deleting sections of the train. This can be useful. Technically, the better one to use would be this one. Not this right here, and it's not allowing me to click on it. Visibility. Oh, here we go. This is what I was trying to find. Oh, that's why. There we go. So basically, what this does: left click gets rid of, right click does that. You create a mountain or something. Left click, and then that whole little section there is gone, but the rest of it around it is still there. So you can create like a mountain base. So you can kind of just click on certain portions of it, left click, and then bring certain portions of it back, and then there you could put like some mountain base or like some concrete or something right over that, or insert whole static meshes pieces that are custom made, like a custom made stone waterfall thing that has this cool looking door behind the waterfall or something. which would all be static meshes and stuff. So you could, easily increase, decrease visibility, and it doesn't like technically delete it in a way. It's different than the add delete sectors, because I don't know how that works. I thought that was the same thing as visibility. I was trying to find this, so I wouldn't really mess with that because I can't explain to you how that works, unfortunately. But like here, and then I can just kind of click on these little certain sections and it'll get rid of it. And then you could put like a platform there and it'll go down and up. And you can technically have static meshes go through the terrain just fine, but if you wanted to have like a door sitting here, the terrain might get in the way, so you'd have to hollow out a little section of it, and make it do that. And if I can decrease the radius, this little section of effect goes down, and it does it in squares, not circles, so it may have to add a little bit more to the if you notice. I'll do it again. Now notice my circle's there, but it made it so that it was square on all sides. So if I do it again, it squared it up. So just do keep that in mind whenever you're making these. So you may want to go back a little further than need be so that it can have room to square it up. And then you've got merging and splitting and all that kind of stuff that has to do with that's textures. So you can, what this does is if I hold control, this is going to probably lag it so much, and it's not really doing anything, probably because it has a default texture. But what this allows you to do is just pan the texture along so you can get it positioned where you want to. And then texture rotating and scaling and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure you can figure that out. Orientation flip, So basically that just flips that around, left click, right click, if you notice. So, and a lot of this is used, for splicing and just, very finite things. And you kind of just have to work with it to get to learn exactly what they do. Basically, and I just explain kind of what they do, so you don't go there and like, whoa, I just messed everything up. So, but you do kind of have to mess with it. And again, I don't know what's up with these sectors. I'm sorry, I don't know that. I don't mess with UDK enough. I haven't actually made a UDK game yet, so I don't know enough about this to do it. But I do know a great deal. So, okay, now on to actually adding terrain textures, and this should be the last part of the tutorial. One thing to note about terrain textures, they're kind of unfortunately they don't play well with all the other materials, because this is a material. Now you can just like drag materials on here, and well, it showed you could, and it's gonna lag whenever you do that because it casts it incredibly massive thing, and that didn't even work. So what you have to do is open up your texture editor. I forgot about this. You can drag stuff on here all you like, but it's not going to do anything. You have to pick, do new terrain setup, layer from material, auto create. Don't do this or this, because that will just give you more options than you need whenever you're first starting out. Just do auto create, and it will take care of all the basic stuff for you and just give you the material on there. So because if you do the other stuff, you have a bunch of advanced options to play with the material a little bit more, and give it names and specifically all a bunch of stuff like that. But just do auto create, and then whatever material is selected in the content browser will automatically be put on here, and it should update the texture. And I'm sorry if it crashes. There we go. So now it's all rock. So whatever your first, now this is very important, so listen carefully here. This is bothering me, so let me switch camera mode while I'm talking about this. Whatever texture you add first, will be the bottom, the default that covers everything. And that's important because basically whichever one you want to be everywhere, like for instance, if you had a lot of mountainous region and you wanted everything to be mostly rock except in a few places, or if you had a big plains area where you wanted everything to be mostly grass except in a few places, that's important. Why? Because whichever one you add first will be, whenever you add other textures in here, and I'll show you this in just a second, once I get this lined up back where it's supposed to be. This thingy. Okay. Whenever you add textures and stuff, you'll have one that is your main default, and that's like your kind of your bottom layer, and then you add, or you add and subtract from that, basically. It's kind of hard to explain without showing you, but I wanted to just to let you know, you kind of want to pay attention to which ones you're putting first, and you can actually move them around later, but then that kind of starts messing stuff up. And I've had to delete many terrains before because I put them in the wrong order and they kind of messed up. Now, another important thing is you can click on this, and because I only have one texture in here, it's not really going to make a difference. And then you can click on, I can try and go and do paint. Now, it's not really messing with the texture very much. Let me increase my radius. If you notice, I've got it in paint right up here. Paint. Well, it is actually it is editing it because I only have one texture in here. So let me grab another one. And I want to go back to all assets. Thank you very much. Let's do materials. Now you can only do materials. You can't do 2D textures. You can only use like materials as your on these. It's the only one that will work. You can't do anything but a material. So you have to find just the materials to get it to work. So let me type in grass, and some of the grasses in here are not very good, unfortunately. I'll do this one. It's extremely bright and very almost kind of too green, but I will select it and then go auto create, and I'll show you what I mean by this whole thing. Now notice it added this one in, but it still stayed the rock there. Whoops. So what is this doing? My goodness. Like I said, working with terrain kind of lags it up a lot. So okay, so this is still rock. Now if I click on the grass, it'll start adding grass to it, and it lags. You couldn't really see that going on. Oops, let me take away my strength a little bit. So there we go. It kind of just faded in there, and if I right click, it takes it away. Now, and what I mean by adding and subtracting is pretty much that if you, whichever one is your base, that's what the base is going to be, and then you add textures on top of that. So and that is important, because if you wanted to fill this whole thing with grass and then you wanted to like add another texture faded in with it, it wouldn't like it. Let me get a third texture in here. Let me just find some random. Let's see, materials. I don't know, rock again. I'll just do rock. Let's find this or this. That's rather interesting. So I'll do auto create, and we'll get some more lag while it processes this. And each time you get a terrain setup, layer setup, which pretty much just stores the data in here and uses it. And if you can like if you make one map, you can like import these into other maps and all that kind of stuff. So it is useful. But let me just switch to this one. If it would work, I'm clicking it. Okay. It's gonna have to update because it always. There we go. Now it's switched. Stupid thing not wanting to work correctly. Okay, so here's this. Now if you want to fade this on, it'll kind of work, but then it mostly just overwrites the grass, and then if you subtract from this, you get back the grass again. But you can kind of run into problems because of the way that it puts them in order. And what I'm kind of saying is kind of end up not panning out correctly, and I must have just had some weird going on. But this is, it's fading with the grass and stuff, but you do want your whatever material is going to be most common to have as your base, and then you add stuff on top of that rather than trying to, because basically you can take away this and then you have to go and you switch the grass and you take away that, and then you have your base material on top of that. So it stores all these materials on top of one another, and I don't what I'm saying may not really make much sense until you kind of start using it, and you'll see sometimes whenever you place materials in there, they'll be, you add them in a certain way. You can't really add and subtract this material when you either click the root one or the height map. You'll edit the height and depth of things. But then, you know, you add material. Here we go. Here's some material. I'm going to add that, take away there, add some rock on here. And then you can't go back and add the black rock material to that. It just edits the terrain. So you want this to be your base, because you can only add material on top of this. You can't take this away and have a default, or you can't add this base material. I've said this, talked about this particular subject too much. I stress things a little bit too much, but I just don't want people running into the same frustrations I've run into with things, because I've had to learn this on my own by spending hours and working on something and then not wanting to turn out right because I may have done the things wrong. And you can delete these, but you want to be careful about doing that, because if you were to delete this one, it would automatically default to the grass, but then sometimes it doesn't want to update correctly, and it will be the black rock still on it as a texture, and then you add the grass, and then it screws up. So you want to be careful on deleting these. So, you know, make sure you pick your textures wisely. I mean, you don't have to be paranoid about it, but just go on, experiment with the textures and stuff, and work with it enough, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about when I talk about all this. So moving on, that's obviously you have your terrain here, and a lot of these same things will apply with the terrain, and you can really edit this very well. So if I use smooth, this will nicely kind of end up, wait, actually I have to switch to like a grass. This will smooth, let me increase my strength. Whoops. Or don't work for me correctly. Okay, if I get average. Ugh! Stupid friggin' thing is lagging. Okay. Average works as you would think. It just takes the average of all the materials, kind of runs them together. Smooth just kind of smooths all of the textures into them better, and it's not wanting to work correctly because it's disappearing. Stupid thingy. But you know, you kind of rub this in it. You're not really seeing much difference, but if I were to get up here, and this is good on mountain sides because you can kind of blend the grass from below with the stone up top, and it ends up blending very nicely. Because I have so much grass, it's not wanting to do it. But if you notice, it does it very slightly. So if you look right here and all around right here, here's the stone and here's the grass, and it kind of starts blending it together. And it is hard to see because I already did a bunch of it. But if you notice, it's kind of just blending the grass with the stone a little bit nicer and making a better transition than just the regular stuff. And it does it very slightly. Especially if you have a lot of fall off and your radius is really big and your strength is really, well, your strength needs to be really big for this because it does it slightly. And then of course if you right click, it kind of does the opposite. So if you notice, it's now just putting a bunch of spots everywhere. And then I smooth it, and then notice how some of the parts of the grass is a little bit darker, and it kind of overall it kind of blended it so that 1 second. Sorry about that. But way, as you can see, this kind of got a little bit of stone in there, and the more textures you add, the more it can smooth. And it's kind of hard to see whenever you're doing it, but if you hold it down there for long enough, you'll end up like, wait, oh wait, it does look different. Oh, okay, I see the difference now. So, and again, a lot of this you kind of have to get in there and just mess with to be able to learn how it works. And then of course noise, average, you would expect what it does. It kind of does the same thing as smooth, just it averages all this stuff together. And then noise, where's that? There it is. If I do this, you can see the textures kind of undulating on the side of the mountain here, like right here. So, and then right clicking, it just kind of undulates them all. So that's that. And then of course you got your texture things, and then this is used, and let me go ahead and pan this texture, and you can see it may not really work so well. I don't know exactly what this is even supposed to do. It's not really panning the texture very much now, is it? Okay, well, some of this stuff may not even be used anymore. I know they've done some changes to the texture stuff recently in some of the past updates. Deca layer. You can, here's some stuff like using to be able to, like a new terrain setup layer. If you already had one of these done, then you could import that in here. You click it, and then here's a lot more. If you don't do auto create, this is what you'll get. You'll get a bunch of all this kind of stuff, and the grouping and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise it just saves it as default and you don't have to worry about doing all that naming. Terrain material, I don't know what that did. Deco layer, what this is pretty much just like a set decoration layer that has all the foliage and stuff stored on it that you can kind of import. You can't really click it, but I don't know. You can also edit your terrain properties, and you want to make sure that you have a good sun. So there's the sun kind of shining down on this, and you can see this area over here is lit up while this is not. So the sun is level. This is gonna look really bad. Whoops, I clicked the wrong thing. Now my cursor's screwed up. There we go. I actually clicked play in viewport instead of doing play this level in editor window. And the lighting is going to need to be rebuilt because I added a whole bunch of texture to the game, so it may be glitched out or not. Hi, sun. Let's just hop down here. And here we go. Now, by default, you can typically just walk up everything. And then, of course, I fell down right there. I didn't actually walk, so let me go up here again. And I can't actually walk up that, so there are some points of having steep cliffs and stuff. Here's all these jagged rocks and everything that you're walking around on. And it's really dark down here. I can't really see anything. And I actually got stuck, so there's that. But that's kind of how that works off. So you want to be careful when you're trained for that reason too, because unless you set with your player stuff, the jump height and all that kind of stuff, which I'll get into much later on, because that's kind of tricky editing all that kind of stuff, the cameras and whatnot. But if you set specific things like that, then the player, you have to take into account what your jump height and that kind of stuff, and walking, whenever you're walking up things, what the distance of incline that you can walk up without falling, what that is in your physics and stuff whenever you're making your map. And you may need to change it as time goes on, but getting a good height map is tricky. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time, but once it's done, it can be very rewarding. Now, if you go into foliage mode, landscape mode, I'm not sure. I've tried to work with that, and I can't really get it to work very well. Now, you will get a lot of lag whenever you're doing stuff in foliage mode and adding foliage. It does tend to lag it up a bit, so do be warned before adding foliage. I'm warning you. Now, you can drag static meshes in here, and by that you can do trees and stuff. Speed trees also work. Now, I'll just kind of open this up and do tree. That's not what I want. I want a tree. And you got all kinds of stuff. So let's just get this. And I'll just kind of this, and I'll have to scroll down again. You need to make sure you do actually select a static mesh. That's important. So drag that in there, and you can have multiple of these. Now what this will do is density. I want to set this down because that's basically how many trees you're going to spawn within that little bubble. So you want to set this down, otherwise you're going to get a ton of lag, so make sure you do that. And then you got, what's really cool is you can set the max angle. Like you can set, it'll randomly pick numbers between, I'll see if I can expand this window a little bit. There we go. So basically it'll randomly pick like Z offset, random pitch, ground slope, and it'll randomly pick numbers if you set them so between them, and the trees will be oriented differently. So it's just not like, oh look, I can definitely tell that they just used like some kind of landscape editor and just plow this area over with a forest. It'll orient them a little bit differently each time, so there's a little bit of variation, and it's not just kind of the same tree in the same position repeatedly, because that would kind of get old. Even though and you can't go and manually place each tree just right and place different trees everywhere. You're going to have the same tree, and you have the same trees even in regular forests appear multiple times. You know, a pine forest, you've got lots of pine wood, but they don't all look exactly the same. They're not all oriented in 90-degree angles to each other. You know, so this will help when doing that. You know, pitch and Z offset, which is, you know, heights and all this kind of stuff that you can mess around with. And then, you know, your paint density and your brush size. Now, let me just kind of place some trees down here, and this is going to lag. And it might have crashed. Yeah, it might have crashed. But, I'll just kind of quickly get this off before it ends. But basically, you can just kind of place your trees and foliage through this method. You can do rocks. I mean, you could place whole houses like this too. Whoop, it did not crash. That is a good thing. Here we go. Here's our tree. And it placed down only one because in our density we have selected one. So there we go. There's our tree. And you can do forest like this. Now if you were to do two, it wouldn't place two in the same spot. It would just place two within this radius. And we can increase the density, you know, the brush size. You know, there we go. If we get a much bigger brush size, it's kind of useful for doing the forest and stuff. Because, good lord, that's a lot bigger than I thought it would be. So there you go. You could do like, you know, that, and then even though we have set to a density of 1, because we increased our paint density, it kind of like increased the amount that we would get. Basically, even though you set this is kind of like a bit overriding, so to speak. But setting these, if you have like multiple trees and stuff, or rocks or whatever, you can set the individual distances to have variations. So you can have like a lot of one type of tree and a little bit of the other. But then overall, the density will be set by the paint density, if that kind of makes sense. So you want to play around with that. And now we have like this kind of better looking landscape already by adding a bunch of trees everywhere. So that's pretty much all there is to talk about the texture editor. It's not too involved, but it is in a way kind of complicated. But once you know, whoa, I'm sorry about that. I did not expect UDK to suddenly. Like I said, it can really kind of lag whenever you're messing with this stuff. So make sure you have a good computer. I am running a server at the same time and have a bunch of other windows open, so my game is not, my UDK is not completely optimal at the moment. Anyway, so yeah, that's that. That's my take on terrains in the foliage editor. There's a little bit more to do with the foliage editor. You have all these other buttons, but not really sure what all of them do. You can kind of figure it out, I'm sure, if you mess around with it. I mean, I do know what they do, but it's relatively simple. It's pretty much just the same stuff. This will always stay the same throughout all of this, but then you just have different options here, and you can do whatever you want. And this doesn't, you don't have to do this with just terrain, as you see. You can do it with multiple different things. So this technically doesn't have to do exactly just with the terrain. It's just an editor for doing foliage. But I just I wanted to include it here because you would use it with terrain a lot. So that's that. But do notice it did actually do a little bit of offsetting. It did, because of our terrain, it put them directly on there, so you can get some weird looking funky trees hanging off the sides and stuff, like this one over here. But then if I were to set this more, they would orient, and like, the actual tree would maybe spin around in different directions and all that kind of stuff. So if that makes sense. Alright, I've been doing this for a while, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it here, and hope you've enjoyed.